knows that the Mekong is meant to be murky and muddy. It should be dense with tumbling sediment, its riverbed entirely obscured, along with all the species that live in it. Its hundreds of species of fish, freshwater turtles, its extraordinary megafauna of giant catfish and stingray, and the last surviving population of smiling Irrawaddy dolphin. The water level near the village has also changed dramatically. The cause? Nearby dams that choke the river and drastically alter not just its natural flow of water, but also sediments, nutrients, and migratory species. The impact? The stretch of the river that the villagers had demarcated as a no-take or no-fishing zone no longer boasts the variety of fish it once did, and there are less fish overall. And there is greater food insecurity in the village that once relied on fishing for livelihoods. WWF has been working with local communities on fishery management projects, and they work. One study of fish reserves in 23 separate communities in Thailand demonstrated markedly increased fish richness, density, and biomass relative to adjacent areas. The findings of that research suggest that networks of small, community-based reserves are reliable, effective models for protecting biodiversity and augmenting fisheries in the face of unprecedented pressures on rivers. But the no-take zone cannot offset the impact of dams. It cannot compensate for changes in water flow, the reduction in sediments and nutrients, the end of traditional migratory routes for certain fish species. Villagers can no longer rely on the wild fisheries that have sustained their community for generations. Instead of free, nutritious, climate-neutral wild fish protein, they are forced to look for other ways to feed their families or to earn an income. For many, this means planting cassava as a cash crop, knowing full well that it is a temporary alternative, one that will eventually rob the soil of its nutrients and leave the land barren. What I saw in Sipandon is replicated in thousands of communities along the Mekong in Cambodia, Laos, Thailand, and Vietnam. And this is because many of the decisions taken in the Mekong and in countless rivers across the world have been short-sighted and made without understanding all possible implications. And with climate change worsening droughts, floods, storms, and sea level rise, the long-term resilience of a river system upon which tens of millions of people depend must be the critical priority. Zoom out from Sipandon and you'll see the entire Mekong Delta shrinking and sinking. Not because of sea level rise, but because too much sediment, gravel, sand, and mud is being trapped behind hydropower dams and extracted by sand mining. Half of the Mekong Delta, home to 21 million people and 18% of Vietnam's GDP, is sinking 5 times faster than sea levels are rising. Even if I had a magic button I could press to stop sea levels from rising, the Mekong would still keep sinking unless we take action upstream. Decisions have been taken that underestimated the impact on and importance of sediment flow. For so long, rivers have been viewed solely as conduits or pipes for water. But rivers are dynamic systems, and so are the deltas they create and sustain. Deltas need a sufficient supply of mud and sand from rivers to keep them above the seas and counteract the natural erosion of the waves. If this process is compromised, and if sufficient sediment does not reach the Mekong Delta, the consequences are disastrous. The result is what we see today, the sinking and shrinking of the delta, threatening people's lives and livelihoods in one of the world's great rice baskets and a critical supply chain in the global economy. But there is hope that the Mekong can be saved, along with other degraded rivers, because of a recent significant change in global attitudes towards rivers. In the last 6 months, rivers have risen in the international agenda. It is now much more widely recognized that healthy rivers, lakes, and wetlands are central to global efforts to tackle the nature and climate crisis and drive sustainable development. At the 14th Ramsar Wetlands COP in November last year, there was real appetite for ambitious river restoration targets. At the Climate Change COP in Egypt, rivers featured for the first time, recognized for their central role in climate change adaptation. At the Biodiversity COP in Montreal, the 30 by 30 target was expanded to explicitly include inland waters alongside land and seas. This finally gave freshwater diversity equal status and ensured that the world targeted the protection and restoration of 30% of rivers. And we just had the UN Water Conference in New York, the first for 46 years. This built real momentum for action on water and freshwater ecosystems. Many sessions focused on the importance of rivers and freshwater ecosystems in tackling our water, nature, and climate crisis. I want to specifically highlight the Freshwater Challenge, a session hosted by the government of Colombia that launched an ambitious initiative driven by 10 countries that aims to leverage the support needed to bring 300,000 kilometers of rivers and 350 million hectares of inland waters under restoration by 2030. I plead to the Mekong countries to join this initiative. It is incredible to think that it has taken this long to galvanize this level of interest and concern for rivers when they are the lifeblood of societies and economies, our freshwater life support systems. Without rivers, we wouldn't have our thirst quenched or our bellies full. We wouldn't be healthy, productive, or fulfilled humans. I am very consciously using the word rivers rather than water, as I wish to focus on the whole sum of it, including the sediment and biodiversity within it, just as I also want to highlight the much wider ecosystem reliant on our Mekong and the importance of including everyone in efforts to save it. The Mekong flows through many communities, cities, and countries, all of which depend on a healthy Mekong to drive sustainable development. Governments, the public, civil society groups have key roles to play, but I want to focus on one group in particular that can do much more to safeguard the diverse benefits of the Mekong: the private sector. Private companies are often negatively associated with rivers. Fingers point at them for excessive use of water, pollution, and the degradation of ecosystems, for putting short-term profit before the long-term health and resilience of rivers that are crucial to their operations and supply chains. But private businesses have a vested interest in ensuring the Mekong River system thrives. The lower Mekong in Cambodia and Vietnam hosts key players in textile and electronic sector supply chains that collectively constitute a substantial share of the global economy. All companies need to adopt a new approach to water and rivers based on stewardship rather than exploitation. A good place to start is to assess water risks. Business profitability is threatened by water risks that worsen as our climate changes. Increasing droughts and floods, altered rainfall patterns, and river flows affect staff, factories, offices, customers, growth, and return on investment. Using tools that already exist, such as WWF's Water Risk Filter, companies can assess water risks and decide how and where to best respond. For some, the initial priority will be changing the way they manage water as a company. For others, it will be about committing resources to implementing solutions along their supply chains. Strategic responses by the private sector must involve collective action to help build the resilience of the river system, as this is the only way to minimize water risks long term. And no company can do this alone. As the private sector uncovers the scale and urgency of their water and climate risks, they should invest in nature-based solutions. To do this, the private sector would benefit from the knowledge of the Mekong River Commission Secretariat, development partners, CSOs, and academics gathered in this room. Business as usual will mean ever-increasing water risks as the impacts of climate change overwhelm the river's capacity to mitigate them, leaving companies facing drowned or stranded assets, and the Mekong region losing its competitive edge to other river basins where companies have come together to collectively make a difference. Of course, there's no single solution to the variety of challenges facing the Mekong. In some cases, we need to accelerate investment in existing solutions. In others, we need to innovate. This brings me to one of the greatest immediate threats to people and nature in the Mekong, the fact that the delta is sinking and shrinking. We know that two main river channels in the Mekong Delta have lost 2 to 3 meters in elevation over the past 2 decades, and they continue to lose 10 centimeters per year. The result is that salt water is intruding further into the delta, and the water table is dropping, posing an ever greater risk to the rice basket of the region and people's livelihoods. At the heart of this is a huge reduction in the amount of mud and sand reaching the delta due to hydropower dams and unsustainable sand mining across the basin. A solution is urgently needed, but it's impossible to develop an effective strategy without reliable data. And monitoring sand flowing through rivers is not easy. But now it has been done, and I would like to commend the leadership of the Vietnam Disaster and Dikes Authority within the Ministry of Agriculture and Rural Development for its innovative geotechnical tool that measures the volume of sand entering and leaving the delta, the sand extracted for use, as well as the volume of sand moving and stored in the riverbed. This project, funded by the government of Germany under its International Climate Initiative, is an excellent collaboration that resulted in the first ever Delta-wide sand budget. The results for 2022 still need to be peer-reviewed and validated, but the findings are alarming. Most significantly, if current extraction rates of sand for construction and landfill continue along this same path in the Mekong, stocks of exploitable sand will be exhausted within 10 years, undermining development plans since sand is the primary raw material for the construction industry. But it will also undermine water and food security across the delta, and the delta's resilience and dynamic capacity to stay above the sea. This sand budget is proving to be an important decision-making tool that could complement the Mekong River Commission's action plan, and it could be replicated at a greater scale, extended to a basin-wide sand budget. The sand budget shows what can be achieved when different stakeholders work together to tackle the challenges facing the Mekong. Collective action and coordinated transboundary actions are the only ways forward. The people of that village in Sipandon cannot solve their challenges alone, nor can any government, business, or community solve all the challenges of the Mekong River. But together, we can. One example of how this is being done is a USAID-funded project implemented by WWF, focused on strengthening civil society's participation in natural resource management in the lower Mekong region. When decisions are made that will impact nature and people, indigenous and local communities, and the diversity of people within these communities, those most marginalized economically and socially must be included in the process of decision-making. Their voices need to be amplified and heard. At that community meeting in the village of Sipandon, we just heard from men. Only in the final minutes of the meeting did a woman speak, seated far away from the stage. She was the deputy village chief. I know that many gender equality indicators in Laos are positive, and we must congratulate Laos for that. But more needs to be done, not just in Laos, but in all countries of the greater Mekong and elsewhere, so that women, young people, those who are differently abled, indigenous peoples, those who are not in positions of power, can be included in policy decisions and benefit from them. A more inclusive approach would act as a strong driver and catalyst for minimizing food insecurity, loss of livelihoods, and the intensifying impacts of climate change. We can halt unsustainable sand extraction in the Mekong Delta and pave the way towards a more resilient future. We can invest in initiatives that work with nature and the river to sustain the economic supply chains connected to a healthy, hardworking Mekong across agriculture, aquaculture, food and beverage, textile, and electronic industries. The world is waking up to rivers, and there is growing momentum now for change. We must bring river resilience to the center of decision-making because that is where it should be. The choice is clear. Continue with business as usual and watch the river degrade, and with it, its invaluable benefits to communities and businesses, or chart a new course towards inclusive, resilient, and sustainable development, a course where decisions factor in the value of a healthy Mekong and the diverse benefits it provides to people and nature. Thank you very much.